The Demonic Virtue by Knial R. Piper II. Part 1, Chapter 6. The darkness swung and swirled around breaking waves of light. The spherical prison of the lone angel rolled with these waves. Carried across the engulfing black ocean by effectual energy, the destination was unknown, for the path of travel was non-existent. Alone, in the rock, after many ages, the young angel stirred. His consciousness returned for the first time. Two hard eyes worked their lids open to meet the blackness. He felt for his halo that once sat above his head. It was still missing. There was only this blackness. It was not the same black nothingness he had experienced before. This was a darkness that was black. He could see its vibrant color. It felt significant. It felt warm. The aches and pains burned his joints. He forced his arms out into the crumbling stone. He stretched his knees to the same result. He had enough room to move, but not enough room to be free. Confined to the prison, he snarled and recalled the incident of the white spark. He pondered the crack in the wall. He hated the Creator. He rubbed the ashes from his face and looked about the cavern. There was a burning glow keeping him company. Above his head sat a single red dot. It was a hot ember. Addifer could not move his hand to touch it. The warmth was coming from this small ember. He looked down at his cramped being and blew a sigh of anguish. At this breath, the ember reacted. Looking curiously at the dot, he prepared for it to explode as the white speck had. After a moment, he gathered a breath and blew on the ember. It sparkled, morphing yellow, then orange. It cooled back to red. He did this several times, and the ember grew. With each breath, he managed to turn the small dot into a ceiling of fire. The rock was crumbling into smaller embers that fell and scarred his skin. He felt the weakness in the prison walls and thought of forcing his hands into the painful mess. So he reached up from his coffin and plunged both hands into the soft rock. Immediately, a pain like no other shot through every fiber of his being. He screamed as he ripped the ceiling apart. The embers fell on his burned face. Blindly, he pushed mercilessly through the pain and through the fire. The ensuing events left his beautiful vision of control and power over circumstances in ashes. Wingless and swollen, he emerged from his fiery grave. He pulled his body to the surface and across many more burning coals. Ash rained from the sky and smoke filled the air. Every breath he took burned and enraged revolt in his lungs. He rolled into a pile of ash and wept. A volcanic burst in the distance shook the molten floor below him. Hopeless, helpless, and so utterly alone, he laid on his back in the filth and fire. He burned as he watched the sky turn black. At first, the smoke was low and gray, but now it had risen in a thick black sheet that blotted out his vision. It sealed the rock planet. As the sky set fire and smoke blanketed the space above, Addifer fell uncomfortably asleep in a bed of rising embers. Chapter 7. Once more, many ages passed, and the angel's body began to harden under the soot and ash. The small rock that once imprisoned him found solace around another white spark that guided its orbit. The chaos continued in pattern as the weary traveler rested. His sleep was long and deep. Upon awakening, his yawn was cut short by the inhalation of smoke. A coughing fit ensued. As he began to move about, his skin ripped open and bled as his movements stretched the dried skin apart. Never had such unpleasantness been his to beget. There was no fire or ash in heaven. Why would the Creator allow such agony? He asked himself. Was this punishment for his desire to leave the kingdom? He was angry, yet accepting, for while this existence was wretched, it was certainly not heaven. He had asked for something more than what he had, and this certainly was something. The skin of his eyelids ripped open during his flood of thoughts. His eyes were bombarded by light. Beams of light carved themselves into his stare. He groaned and tried to cover his eyes, but the pain prevented his movement. A tear fell from his eyes to the embers below. The soles of his feet had developed callous skin to shield the fire from eating him alive. Fire and heat scorched the land before him. All was aflame, and the sky rained fire. He rose from his bed of blood, ash, and smoldering embers. He looked up to see his halo had not returned. Depression overtook him, and he grew angry. The once golden skin was swollen, bruised, burned, and red. He looked continually towards the sky. For a moment he wept. The tears poured from his eyes to evaporate before they could leave his face. The desire inside him brought him up to gather his anger and stare righteously at the burning sky. The fire was now inside him. Finally he shouted, "What is this? Punishment for freedom? Punishment for desire?" He waited for a reply that would never come. Only silence. The distorted creature now dropped his chin to his chest in defeat. It was powerlessness he had to accept. In utter and complete defeat, he dropped his hands and let go of all ambition he once held up against the Creator and the light from yonder. The resentments boiled inside him. It burned his throat, and he felt it ready to escape. Like the entire existence of his being was crawling out from inside him, he let it go. He exhaled his anger, and a fury of cold air rushed forth from his mouth. His breath froze the land. The fire was extinguished and the volcanoes died under a layer of frost. It was not long after. The frost blanketed the land. The smoke cleared from the sky and heavy clouds took its place. From these clouds came snow. A strange concept was snow to the tired angel. It had all happened so fast. He was not completely sure what exactly had occurred. This weather was all new to Adfer. Seasons did not occur in heaven, for heaven was free of change. While the falling snow felt refreshing, the driving blizzards quickly brought him to desperate despair. The wind was his enemy, and the blanketed floor was an annoyance. After several days, the freezing temperatures nearly drove him insane. Wishing for death to come, but finding no end in sight, he retreated from the land, only to find much of the same. It was funny to him how the fire he once cursed as a memory, he now invited to his reality. He sought the same warmth he had escaped as a shelter for recovery. Returning to heaven would never be an option for the stubborn angel. The snow rose in layers up to his swollen burns on his thighs. Movement became difficult as his knees and energy folded. He stared angrily at the clouds delivering the snow. They reminded him of heaven. He knelt under the driving snow as he raised a frozen hand to the sky. "What is so miraculous about clouds?" he muttered. He could no longer continue. The loneliness inside him was growing as the physical pain pushed him down. He finally fell face first in the snow. Breath turned to ice on his lips. His eyelashes froze together, thus sealing his eyes shut. The snow buried his body as time wore on. Nature stood still beneath the starlight. Years passed, then decades, then centuries. After all this time, the snow melted and the planet filled with water. His body remained, though, through it all, as did his desire to remain free from the Creator. Such was the heart of the angel, that no matter the pain and agony that this world brought, he would carry on and do so with dignity. So his body remained in the now forming oceans. His motionless corpse floated across the waves. He opened his eyes, but his body was too drained to move. He just relaxed in the water and felt its pool. Gentle and soothing, he let the water take him where it might. He enjoyed the pleasantness of waves and riding the flow. All was well until his comfort was interrupted by a familiar voice. This has been Part 1, Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 of The Demonic Virtue by Knial R. Piper II. Tune in next week for Part 1, Chapter 8 of The Demonic Virtue by Knial R. Piper II.